him. Throughout the whole sorrowful ordeal, he bore himself with simple dignity and unostentatious majesty. He would not so much as cast reflections of insincerity upon his would-be murderers when they asked if he were King of the Jews. With but little qualifying explanation he accepted the designation, knowing that, while they had chosen to reject him, he would be the last to afford them real national leadership, even in a spiritual sense. Jesus said little during these trials, but he said enough to show all mortals the kind of human character man can perfect in partnership with God, and to reveal to all the universe the manner in which God can become manifest in the life of the creature, when such a creature truly chooses to do the will of the Father, thus becoming an active son of the living God. His love for ignorant mortals is fully disclosed by his patience and great self-possession in the face of the jeers, blows, and buffetings of the coarse soldiers and the unthinking servants. He was not even angry when they blindfolded him and, derisively striking him in the face, exclaimed, "Prophesy to us who it was that struck you." Pilate spoke more truly than he knew when, after Jesus had been scourged, he presented him before the multitude, exclaiming, "Behold the man!" Indeed, the fear-ridden Roman governor little dreamed that at just that moment the universe stood at attention, gazing upon this unique scene of its beloved sovereign thus subjected in humiliation to the taunts and blows of his darkened and degraded mortal subjects. And as Pilate spoke, there echoed throughout all Nebadon, "Behold God and man!" Throughout a universe untold millions have ever since that day continued to behold that man, while the God of Havona, the supreme ruler of the universe of universes, accepts the man of Nazareth as the satisfaction of the ideal of the mortal creatures of this local universe of time and space. In his matchless life, he never failed to reveal God to man. Now, in these final episodes of his mortal career, and in his subsequent death, he made a new and touching revelation of man to God. 3. The dependable David Zebedee. Shortly after Jesus was turned over to the Roman soldiers at the conclusion of the hearing before Pilate, a detachment of the temple guards hastened out to Gethsemane to disperse or arrest the followers of the Master. But long before their arrival, these followers had scattered. The apostles had retired to designated hiding places. The Greeks had separated and gone to various homes in Jerusalem. The other disciples had likewise disappeared. David Zebedee believed that Jesus' enemies would return, so he early removed some 5 or 6 tents up the ravine near where the Master so often retired to pray and worship. Here he proposed to hide and at the same time maintain a center or coordinating station for his messenger service. David had hardly left the camp when the temple guards arrived. Finding no one there, they contented themselves with burning the camp, and then hastened back to the temple. On hearing their report, the Sanhedrin was satisfied that the followers of Jesus were so thoroughly frightened and subdued that there would be no danger of an uprising or any attempt to rescue Jesus from the hands of his executioners. They were at last able to breathe easily, and so they adjourned, every man going his way to prepare for the Passover. As soon as Jesus was turned over to the Roman soldiers by Pilate for crucifixion, a messenger hastened away to Gethsemane to inform David, and within 5 minutes runners were on their way to Bethsaida, Pella, Philadelphia, Sidon, Shechem, Hebron, Damascus, and Alexandria. And these messengers carried the news that Jesus was about to be crucified by the Romans at the insistent behest of the rulers of the Jews. Throughout this tragic day, until the message finally went forth that the Master had been laid in the tomb, David sent messengers about every half-hour with reports to the apostles, the Greeks, and Jesus' earthly family, assembled in the home of Lazarus in Bethany. When the messengers departed with the word that Jesus had been buried, David dismissed his corps of local runners for the Passover celebration and for the coming Sabbath of rest, instructing them to report to him quietly on Sunday morning at the home of Nicodemus, where he proposed to go in hiding for a few days with Andrew and Simon Peter. This peculiar-minded David Zebedee was the only one of the leading disciples of Jesus who was inclined to take a literal and plain matter-of-fact view of the Master's assertion that he would die and rise again on the 3rd day. David had once heard him make this prediction, and, being of a literal turn of mind, now proposed to assemble his messengers early Sunday morning at the home of Nicodemus, so that they would be on hand to spread the news in case Jesus rose from the dead. David soon discovered that none of Jesus' followers were looking for him to return so soon from the grave. Therefore did he say little about his belief, and nothing about the mobilization of all his messenger force on early Sunday morning, except to the runners who had been dispatched on Friday forenoon to distant cities and believer centers. And so these followers of Jesus, scattered throughout Jerusalem and its environs, that night partook of the Passover, and the following day remained in seclusion. 4. Preparation for the crucifixion. After Pilate had washed his hands before the multitude, thus seeking to escape the guilt of delivering up an innocent man to be crucified just because he feared to resist the clamor of the rulers of the Jews, he ordered the master turned over to the Roman soldiers, and gave the word to their captain that he was to be crucified immediately. Upon taking charge of Jesus, the soldiers led him back into the courtyard of the praetorium, and after removing the robe which Herod had put on him, they dressed him in his own garments. These soldiers mocked and derided him, but they did not inflict further physical punishment. Jesus was now alone with these Roman soldiers. His friends were in hiding, his enemies had gone their way. Even John Zebedee was no longer by his side. It was a little after 8 o'clock when Pilate turned Jesus over to the soldiers, and a little before 9 o'clock when they started for the scene of the crucifixion. During this period of more than half an hour, Jesus never spoke a word. The executive business of a great universe was practically at a standstill. Gabriel and the chief rulers of Nebadon were either assembled here on Urantia, or else they were closely attending upon the space reports of the archangels in an effort to keep advised as to what was happening to the Son of Man on Urantia. By the time the soldiers were ready to depart with Jesus for Golgotha, they had begun to be impressed by his unusual composure and extraordinary dignity, by his uncomplaining silence. Much of the delay in starting off with Jesus for the site of the crucifixion was due to the last-minute decision of the captain to take along 2 thieves who had been condemned to die. Since Jesus was to be crucified that morning, the Roman captain thought these 2 might just as well die with him as wait for the end of the Passover festivities. As soon as the thieves could be made ready, they were led into the courtyard, where they gazed upon Jesus, one of them for the first time, but the other had often heard him speak, both in the temple and many months before at the Pella camp. 5. Jesus' death in relation to the Passover. There is no direct relation between the death of Jesus and the Jewish Passover. True, the Master did lay down his life in the flesh on this day, the day of the preparation for the Jewish Passover, and at about the time of the sacrificing of the Passover lambs in the temple. But this coincidental occurrence does not in any manner indicate that the death of the Son of Man on earth has any connection with the Jewish sacrificial system. Jesus was a Jew, but as the Son of Man he was a mortal of the realms. The events already narrated and leading up to this hour of the Master's impending crucifixion are sufficient to indicate that his death at about this time was a purely natural and man-managed affair. It was man and not God who planned and executed the death of Jesus on the cross. True, the Father refused to interfere with the march of human events on Urantia, but the Father in paradise did not decree, demand, or require the death of his Son as it was carried out on earth. It is a fact that in some manner, sooner or later, Jesus would have had to divest himself of his mortal body, his incarnation in the flesh, but he could have executed such a task in countless ways without dying on a cross between 2 thieves. All of this was man's doing, not God's. At the time of the Master's baptism, he had already completed the technique of the required experience on earth and in the flesh which was necessary for the completion of his 7th and last universe bestowal. At this very time, Jesus' duty on earth was done. All the life he lived thereafter, and even the manner of his death, was a purely personal ministry on his part for the welfare and uplifting of his mortal creatures on this world and on other worlds. The gospel of the good news that mortal man may, by faith, become spirit-conscious that he is a son of God is not dependent on the death of Jesus. True indeed, all this